Well, good day to everyone joining us, and welcome to today's X-Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled Shaping the Future of Rheumatology Trials, Operational Strategies, Industry Trends, and Breakthroughs in Cell and Gene Therapies. My name is Ryan Muse, and I'll be your X-Talks host for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes, and this presentation includes a Q&A session with our speakers. Now, the webinar is designed to be interactive, and webinars work best when you're involved. So please feel free to submit your questions and your comments for our speakers throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. This chat box is located in the control panel, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. And if you require any assistance along the way, you can contact me at any time by sending a message using the same chat panel. I'd also like to welcome our attendees viewing this presentation from our LinkedIn Live event, and I encourage you to submit questions as well via the comments tab. At this time, know that all participants are in listen-only mode, and please note that the event will be recorded and made available for streaming to those who registered on xtalks.com. At this point, I'd like to thank MedPace, who developed the content for this presentation. MedPace is a scientifically driven, global, full-service clinical contract research organization providing phase 1 to 4 clinical development services to the biotechnology, pharmaceutical, and medical device industries. MedPace's mission is to accelerate the global development of safe and effective medical therapies through its high science and disciplined operating approach that leverages local regulatory and deep therapeutic expertise across all major areas, including oncology, cardiology, metabolic disease, endocrinology, central nervous system, and antiviral and anti-infective. Dr. Andrew Head is board certified in internal medicine and rheumatology with 20 years of prior experience in clinical practice and as a clinical associate professor of medicine. Dr. Head has experience in diagnosis and long-term management of patients with a variety of complicated autoimmune and rheumatic diseases. Dr. Jeffrey Vassallo has a PhD in molecular biology with a postdoctoral training in experimental hematology. He has worked in drug development, including preclinical and clinical research, for more than 27 years. In this capacity, he led research and project teams internally and in collaboration with scientists and clinicians from pharmaceutical companies, academia, and the FDA. Ms. Jackie Widmer has over 18 years of global industry experience leading phase 1 to 4 studies across multiple therapeutic areas, including over 13 years of MedPace global project management in progressive leadership roles. She has over 5 years of pharmaceutical experience leading global rare disease and gene therapy clinical development programs. And Ms. Maisha Campbell is an accomplished professional with over 17 years of experience directing a global team of strategic partners, support staff, and vendors for multi-million-dollar global marketing, patient recruitment, and patient retention campaigns. But now, without further ado, I'd like to hand the mic over to our first speaker for today, Dr. Andrew Head. You may begin when you're ready.
Well, thank you so much, Ryan. I can speak for my colleagues and myself that we're delighted to talk about this extremely important topic of the future in autoimmune disease and rheumatology trials today. It's an honor for our team to have this chance to present as we have all worked together on several projects, which gives us a unique perspective on autoimmune and rheumatologic diseases and the issues that relate to drug development. So let's go ahead and begin by reviewing our objectives from a medical perspective. First, we'll begin with a broad overview of autoimmune disease, the burdens, challenges, and the progress being made in understanding mechanisms and potential therapeutic targets. Then we'll review the traditional treatment paradigm in rheumatology, which leaves an unmet need. Following this, it leads us to the importance of new rheumatology drug development to provide more treatment options for growing numbers of patients living with these diseases. And finally, we discuss categories of novel therapies being studied in clinical programs and strategies for a site to enroll patients into studies based on the patient's clinical status, disease in their disease severity as it relates to the eligibility. So here I'll start with some simple but important concepts that I want you to keep in mind as we progress through the presentation. First of all, how do we define what is an autoimmune disease? Normally, the immune system activates when provoked by an external insult, such as an infection or an injury. At that point, through various mechanisms, the response is a cascade of events which attract immune cells and promotes an increase in pro-inflammatory cytokines, resulting in inflammation. Once this external threat is neutralized through various negative feedback mechanisms, the inflammation is controlled, and eventually the immune system returns back to baseline. So with autoimmune diseases, for some reason, the immune system is inappropriately activated, or it won't switch off and then attacks healthy body tissue, resulting in injury. This is typically initiated by abnormal immune cells, including T cells and B cells reacted to self-antigens, and it ultimately results in tissue destruction and organ dysfunction. It's generally recognized that there are more than 100 autoimmune diseases, and overall, autoimmune disease affects 10% of the world population. Many of these conditions fall under what we would call autoimmune rheumatic diseases. Some are more commonly known conditions, such as rheumatoid arthritis. Others are less common, including lupus, lupus nephritis, scleroderma, or systemic sclerosis, Sjogren's disease, and inflammatory myopathies. Some of the others are not considered rheumatic disease, such as type 1 diabetes, inflammatory bowel disease, some neurological diseases such as multiple sclerosis or myasthenia gravis, and autoimmune thyroid and autoimmune hepatitis, amongst others. So all of these diseases are a burden. Much can be said here, but to summarize, for the patients, they reduce quality of life, they can be disabling and may shorten lifespan. Autoimmune diseases are the second leading cause of chronic illness in the United States. And as a category, they are the leading cause of morbidity in women. And I can point out here that many of the rheumatology diseases disproportionately impact women and minorities as well. It's also a huge burden in terms of cost on the healthcare system and cost to society. These diseases are some of the costliest to diagnose and treat. And the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases estimated that an annual autoimmune disease treatment costs in the United States is more than $100 billion. Autoimmune diseases are complex, but despite this, much progress has been made to expand our understanding of the epidemiology and the risk factors. Our understanding of the mechanisms is more advanced, and in the last 20 years, we've identified more potential targets for treatments that represent opportunities to develop new therapies in rheumatology. So here's a brief perspective reviewing the current treatment paradigm in rheumatic disease. To begin with, we have several diseases with relatively few currently approved treatments. Traditionally, the clinicians have had to use what we call traditional disease-modifying anti-rheumatic drugs, or DMARDs. These are broad immunosuppressant medications, so we see off-target side effects, mainly infections. Additionally, we see limited efficacy and response rates. Those who do respond may not achieve a durable response either, so it just doesn't last, unfortunately. When a patient doesn't respond after time, we move from one therapy to another, hoping one will eventually provide a response. Since there has been no widely available testing to predict a response in an individual to a specific treatment, the approach being used ends up in exercise and trial and error. This results in wasted time and frustration from both the patient and the clinician. Even with more advanced therapies, more targeted small molecules and biologics, there are groups of patients who will not respond to one or the other, and it would be nice to know ahead of time. Without advancements of tools or predictive testing, we see time lost to futile treatments and progression of disease. So not only are there significant numbers of patients that do not respond to the treatments, when there is a response, the number of patients with sustained remission or low disease activity on treatment is small. For a couple examples in rheumatology, patient surveys suggest about 75% of rheumatoid arthritis patients are not satisfied with treatments. In systemic lupus erythematosus, those in remission or low disease activity after starting on treatment, we see a majority of these patients, or about 2/3, may not maintain the remission or low activity at 5 years. So there remains an unmet need for more effective and durable treatments. Difficult to treat disease, that is failing multiple treatments, including biologics, is common in rheumatology. Due to this, many rheumatologists consider participation in clinical trials should become part of standard care for several historically challenging to treat rheumatic diseases with limited treatments, lupus being a prime example. So as we put this all together, there remains a huge unmet need in the field of rheumatology. For one, we need to develop more effective and targeted options for treatment based on better understanding of mechanisms. And two, we need to develop biomarkers to identify the optimal individuals or groups of patients that share the same targets or mechanism, and enroll those groups of patients most likely to respond to the drug being studied. This helps the trial to succeed, and it could be used in practice to identify the optimal target for a specific patient. So rheumatology trials are important to meet the need to develop new therapies. For one, we're seeing an increased prevalence of these diseases. This is a complex issue, and certainly there have been improvements in diagnosis, but there are other factors, including genetics and environment. The key points are that there are increasing numbers of patients diagnosed with these diseases, and many are diagnosed earlier now. With the increasing numbers, we need more options for effective and safe treatments. And with earlier diagnosis, there are opportunities to potentially treat early, prevent progression, and improve outcomes. We also know the autoimmune rheumatologic diseases are heterogeneous and complex, with differing subtypes and varying disease mechanisms. We know one treatment will not work for all patients with the same disease. We need to develop more treatment options for the different mechanisms, treatments that are more precise and may have less off-target side effects. Finally, as I mentioned earlier, clinical trials can provide an opportunity to develop biomarkers. This can improve stratification by identifying the optimal target in each patient or group of patients, even in patients with different diseases that share a common pathway. Innovative approaches can take advantage of this, using one drug for multiple indications, such as what we see in basket trials that enroll multiple diseases under one study protocol. This strategy improves efficiency, and it can open up access for more potential patients and sites and enhance enrollment. Here I'd like to give a high-level review of some therapeutic categories currently in development. Insight into the huge effort to develop clinical programs and rheumatology indications can be gleaned from review of the current active recruiting industry-funded interventional trials with autoimmune indications. You'll see the number of current clinical programs for each based on a recent search of clinicaltrials.gov from May 2025. So first on the list here are the small molecule drugs. These have benefits of easily passing through cell membranes, targeting and disrupting intracellular mechanisms that lead to inflammation. Additionally, small molecules allow for oral dosing and are less immunogenic than the larger molecules. Disadvantages are more potential drug-drug interactions, and this group may have a less targeted approach. There are currently about 100 small molecule trials recruiting for autoimmune indications. Next, we have biologics. Biologics may modulate cytokines and receptors. Novel approaches with biologics are looking at combinations of targeted therapies and bispecific antibodies that bind two different antigens. Advantages of biologics are familiarity with 20 to 30 years experience in rheumatology practice, and biologics are targeted and may have less drug-drug interactions. Disadvantages are that they're parenteral, and patients may be hesitant to start an IV or an injection. Biologics are larger proteins and may have increased immunogenicity, so we can potentially see some anti-drug antibodies and infusion or injection reactions. Biologics have about 160 actively recruiting autoimmune indication trials. Finally, here I have cell and gene therapies. With these, we see the application of oncology move over to autoimmune disease. Either a patient's own cells or donor cells are modified and introduced into the patient to target certain abnormal immune cells or functions. Advantages here are potential for a prolonged drug-free remission. This has been seen in oncology, and there have been early promising results in autoimmunity. Challenges include complexity in both manufacturing and administration. There's less site and PI experience, and not much long-term safety data in autoimmunity at this point. Although patients may be hesitant as this is the least familiar therapy, and it involves modification of cells and possibly donated cells, which produces some patient anxiety. There are limited sites with the capabilities in a smaller patient pool for clinical trials. Right now, our experience is these studies are targeting more severe or refractory populations. But even with this, the cell therapy trials are robust, with about 150 trials for autoimmune indications. So finally, I'd like to describe or review some of our experience in conducting these trials where there are limited sites and subjects, but how there is still a place for each. Even the same sites can have patients that can fit into each study using the different therapies. Our experience as trials may not directly compete. Having established relationships with and knowing sites can be a benefit to optimize enrollment into each trial, even if it's at the same site. So for small molecules here, you'll see from the investigator perspective, there's several subjects. There may be a larger patient pool of these subjects that have not yet failed as many previous therapies. They may be on a standard of care, yet they're still active, and the PI may be considering addition of another oral medication or increased steroids on top of standard of care. From the patient perspective, we see the patient would prefer better control. Maybe they have some side effects with steroids or prefer not to be on steroids for their frequent flares, but they're not yet willing to start on a injectable or IV treatment such as a biologic, but an oral medication is appealing for the ease of administration. The next potential the potential patients for a biologic study. The PI notes moderate to severe disease despite several standard of care therapies and perhaps even some other biologics. They may have intolerance, or the patients may have had intolerance to oral medication, and they're already on higher doses of steroids. There's still an ongoing risk for damage from the disease, and the patient needs more effective treatments. From the patient perspective, they may have already tried injections and IV biologics, so they're familiar with this administration, and it's not a barrier. They've tried multiple standard of care treatments and steroids, and they don't want the higher doses of steroids that would be required to control the disease otherwise. Finally, we have the cell and gene therapy pool. This third group of subjects, they may be more refractory, and there may be fewer of the subjects per site. These patients have been on several or possibly all standard of care treatments, and they still have active disease and ongoing damage. They need treatment before permanent organ damage, but they're not too severe to have irreversible damage that could render them ineligible for a trial. The PI has knowledge of the mechanism, understands the benefits and risks, and is committed to the long-term follow-up for the study. From the patient perspective, they're frustrated. There's a decline in quality of life. They're facing potential organ damage and mortality. The patient's motivated to find a more effective therapy, both for themselves and for other people suffering with the same disease. The patient trusts their physician. They can be educated about the requirements, benefits, and risks for the trial, and they have hope for a drug-free remission and can commit to the long-term follow-up. So at this point now, we've reviewed the unmet need, the types of therapies in development, and the characteristics of the patients that could fit into the studies. At this point, I will transition to my operational colleagues to discuss strategies to successfully conduct rheumatology trials in a competitive environment.
Thank you, Dr. Head, for a great presentation and sharing your insights. So there are 4 key areas to consider for operational strategies when planning and designing clinical trials in autoimmune and rheumatology indications. MedPace can support and provide guidance in these areas. The first area we'll review are regional and country considerations. It's important to understand patient prevalence and identify regions and countries with eligible patients. Not only is this impactful for the success of the study, but this is also relevant to the clinical development program and ultimate marketing strategy. Determining country-specific, approved, available, and reimbursed treatments is also a key factor when thinking about countries to pursue. This is relevant to the patient diagnostic journey, their therapeutic options they may have, and the standard of care treatment that will play a role in protocol design and identifying patients. It's important to become educated on the competitive therapeutic options for patients, whether they be part of upcoming or ongoing studies in the region, as this too may have an impact on protocol design and specifics regarding your targeted patient population. It's important to understand and assess the regulatory landscape. Engaging with regulators early and obtaining scientific advice increases the likelihood of success. They will be able to provide important considerations, regional perspectives and insights, and regional guidance that may shape your protocol and clinical development strategy for success. One of the most important considerations in protocol and program development is trial design and quality, as this is the main focus of regulatory bodies. It's important protocols are designed in a manner that prioritizes and ensures quality data. There are also country-specific considerations regarding inclusion and exclusion criteria and endpoints. For example, when thinking about pursuing a study in regions where tuberculosis is more prevalent, anticipate building instruction into the protocol for when patients in screening have a positive TB test. Patients with latent TB may still be eligible for participation. When thinking about a lupus patient and study assessments for kidney biopsy, it's important to understand that if a patient had a biopsy within the last 6 months, they may not be reimbursed to have another one, and they may not have the right data then to satisfy inclusion criteria. So it's important to be aware of the regulatory requirements and caveats for optional and protocol mandated biopsies, as these vary also across regions. In cell and gene therapy studies specifically, in the early phases of clinical development programs, it's advised to adhere to a one-country strategy. The regulatory environment in cell and gene therapy studies is dynamic, and by narrowing the focus, there will not be a need to develop country-specific protocol adaptations, and this will also increase your likelihood of a positive regulatory review. In addition, the definition of vulnerable patient population also differs regionally, and this one-country approach will allow for the opportunity to gather robust data to provide further evidence that's supportive of targeting more vulnerable patient populations like pediatric patients in later studies. When considering regions to target, another key aspect to consider is country variation in investigational product requirements around tissue testing standards. Lastly, it's important to understand regional impacts and specifics when defining protocol-specified operational needs. So next we'll review institutional and investigator considerations, particularly when conducting feasibility for autoimmune and rheumatology disorders. It may sound obvious, but ensuring targeted sites have the patient population is critical to study success. Careful vetting and understanding the competitive studies that may be occurring at the site and or the investigator is important. This not only has impacts on patient recruitment, but also on study team resources, which oftentimes influences if a site will successfully recruit and provide quality data. Confirm operational and regulatory infrastructure at each site, making sure sites have experience with cell and gene therapy products, have the needed pharmacy capabilities, and available pre-medications. It's also important to assess site and investigator apheresis and infusion capabilities and interdepartmental collaboration strategies. Using the example of a cell therapy study targeted in the lupus population, the rheumatologist and the hematologist must have collaboration and established communication pathways. Not only is this important due to the therapeutic approach, but also to understand who will be responsible for the safety oversight of the patient and when. Determine internal committee review requirements, timelines, and current backlog. This will help set expectations regarding the site startup process and anticipated timelines. Due to the competitive nature of cell therapies in research, Many sites have newly established review boards in place to review cell therapy research opportunities to decide if they will pursue that specific opportunity. So, understanding this process and any backlog they have and anticipated timing for the additional review board will be important to plan for. In many cell and gene therapies studies, interdepartmental collaboration is required, and it's important to confirm the process for contract and budget negotiations across these departments. So, in many cases, what we found is that sites may not fully be aware of these needs and or may overlook them, which is an important aspect. So, to mitigate contracting delays, it's important to question and address these types of issues upfront to ensure that all parties are planning appropriately. As cell and therapy research in autoimmune and rheumatology disorders is newer to the industry, many institutions do not have yet vetted processes and strategies in place to support optimum efficiency in executing these studies. Providing education to investigators about the investigational product, guidance, and support in thinking about their processes and communication pathways is key to ensuring efficiencies, and it also helps the site feel supported. Again, specific to cell therapy, confirmed proposed countries and investigative sites are FACT or JC accredited. So this accreditation is a lengthy process, and it establishes global standards to collect, process, and administer cell therapies. This not only ensures protocol compliance and patient safety, but it also provides the necessary consistency in procedures and trial conduct. So next, I'll pass this on to my colleague Jeff to continue the discussion on operational strategies.
Thank you, Dr. Head and Jackie, for providing background on the current treatment paradigm, unmet clinical need for this patient population, and many of the operational considerations. I would like to add to these considerations with a focus on the investigational product, noting that cell and gene therapies are typically the most complex compared to small molecules and biologics, and thus thoughtful evaluation is required to successfully operationalize these protocols. Depending on the countries involved, in addition to the location of the drug depot or manufacturing site, specific requirements for import, export, importer of record, in addition to QP release will be required. Additionally, when considering investigational sites, it is reasonable to expect that large academic FACT or JC accredited centers have adequate pharmacy capabilities to prepare gene therapy formulations in addition to cell therapy lab. However, if smaller community centers are needed for the trial, the pharmacy capabilities may be limited and alternative strategies will need to be considered, and this may include a contract pharmacy. Furthermore, for cell and gene therapies, it is important to ensure that the infusion materials required for the product are available at the site or supplied by the sponsor or CRO and are consistent with the materials validated during development of the product. For cell therapy trials, the location of the manufacturing in the investigational sites is critical, and these must be considered given the limited stability of the leukapheresis product and the time required for preparing and shipping the product. Moreover, up to 6 weeks may be required for manufacturing a cell therapy product, and this must be considered for the specific patient population given the potential need for a bridging therapy. To ensure success of a cell therapy trial and to meet regulatory requirements, the chain of custody and identity must be documented and tracked in a manual or electronic vein-to-vein system, which involves several stakeholders, including a cold chain vendor, manufacturing, investigational site, sponsor, and CRO. Given the success of this process is predicated on good communication, we always recommend conducting dry runs at each investigational site with all stakeholders involved to pressure test the process and communication, and importantly, to ensure the success of the trial. As discussed earlier in the presentation, the current treatment paradigm is often inadequate and frustrating to patients and healthcare providers due to a lack of durable response, decrease in quality of life, and disease progression. However, recent advancements in cell and gene therapies provide renewed hope for these patients. Importantly, the fact that there are approximately 150 cell and gene therapy trials for autoimmune indications underscores the interest, investment, and enthusiasm for treating this unmet clinical need. While there is enthusiasm from both investigators and patients for these new therapeutic modalities, there's also a lack of understanding and anxiety in how these therapeutics are different from traditional treatments with small molecules and biologics. Therefore, education programs for both investigators and patients is paramount, and these should highlight benefits and risk, in addition to explaining how these therapeutics differ from standard of care and what is expected as part of the typical patient journey. Specifically, development of autologous cell therapy products often takes 4 to 6 weeks, and during this time, patients may require bridging therapy. Additionally, many early phase cell therapy trials require inpatient hospitalization following infusion. And depending on the mechanism of action, cell and gene therapy products may require patients to participate in a 15-year follow-up study. Despite this additional patient burden, there are advantages to patients, which may include a single dose versus repeat dosing, which is typical for small molecules and biologics, and the possibility of a durable response and improved quality of life. Now I'll turn it over to my colleague Maisha to continue discussing patient recruitment considerations.
All right, thank you, Jeff. Now we're going to walk through how we can support patients in their actual patient journey. So this means engaging patients and also potential referral sources as well as our sites to make sure that they are aware of the study opportunity. And then once they actually enroll in the study, that we are supporting them. So at MedPace, we really take a holistic approach and reviewing the patient persona. We want to understand what is their health and lifestyle, what are their pain points, what ongoing engagement can we provide, and also where we can reach these patients. So you can see from this example, this is a patient with RA. This patient has particular pain points around unpredictable flare-ups, around fatigue, some physical limitations, anxiety, and frustration. We recognize that in terms of making these patients aware of our studies and getting them motivated to enroll in a gene therapy or cell therapy setting, we're really going to have to make sure that they're educated, so providing them with specific patient materials, making sure that we maintain personal communication along the way, being very transparent about what their role is in the study, and then also assisting them with travel services and other services that can help reduce the overall patient burden. We also want to make sure that we identify where we can reach these patients when we're looking at enrollment. As Dr. Head mentioned, there are numerous competing studies for these patients, and so we want to make sure that we know where they are and put in strategies in place that can find them. So that includes the site's databases, primary care rheumatologist offices, advocacy networks, and also digital media tactics such as social media and Google search ads. So really, after we identify who this patient is, how we can engage them, we really want to make sure that we are presenting a patient-centered approach when we are identifying these patients, educating them about the study, and minimizing their patient burden. So as Dr. Head and Jackie said, it's very important that we provide educational tools that both support education on the study in terms of what their role is, but also awareness about the study, what are some of the protocol requirements, and that they are informed of the study opportunity. So that includes working with advocacy groups so that they can make their members aware of the study and provide very centered strategies around that education and awareness plan. Making sure that we're developing study-specific materials that go into, their journey on the study, that go into once they're enrolled, what that participation may look like, but also goes through very specific protocol requirements so that they understand if this protocol in the study is the right one for them. And then also providing educational videos and FAQ documents that really point to what is gene and cell therapy, what is the mode of action for the study, how can so that they can better understand the IP. And they could be better informed and educated and want to move forward with the study opportunity. Making sure at the consent stage that there is a clear understanding of their study requirements, so providing information to them that's easily digestible. That could be in the form of our consents, but also developing tools that complement the consents and tools for overall retention that provide them with more information about what's going to happen at each visit. So for instance, if we're providing a study handbook, having a schedule of events within that study handbook that is patient-friendly, that uses patient-friendly terms as well as icons so that they understand when they go to a visit exactly what's going to happen. Making sure that we're engaging them throughout the study is also very important. So we want to make sure that we are retaining these patients and that we're also answering all of the questions that they may have. So this includes providing regular study updates, not only to the patients, but also to sites who can also inform patients. Making sure that we have a very personalized patient support. That includes travel reimbursements. It also includes providing travel for patients as needed. And then also offering things such as comfort care items that can help them. So if they're at the visit, if it's long visits, providing things such as even a blanket can go a long way, not only to make sure that they're comfortable, but also to provide a thank you for their study participation. And then just overall, throughout retention, making sure that we are maintaining our involvement. So having that study level reporting, providing post-study feedback when we can. Patients have reported that it's very important for them to understand the overall outcomes of a study that they've participated in. So being able to provide that to them has been a great resource. Making sure that they have easy access to site staff. And also just recurring trainings and check in with sites to make sure that the study is still remaining top of mind. Even after enrollment, they're checking in with their patients, and they were also answering any questions that they may have. And that could be through the form of webinars, for instance, or in-person meetings with site staff. We also want to make sure that we have a very comprehensive educational program that's going to support throughout the development of the drug. And so connecting with our medical communities, I know Dr. Head spoke about providing, and Jackie spoke about providing educational items to investigators specific to the investigational product, but making sure we're looping in not only the investigators, but our autoimmune experts and any other referring physicians so that they're aware of the study parameters, and that they're also able to refer over potential patients. I spoke about advocacy earlier, but looping in those patient advocates, we want to make sure that we are also providing them with tools that walk through the eligibility and protocol questions, and that we're providing them with patient engagement, support, and resources we really do want to make sure that they have input, for instance, into the protocol, into the consent, into the study procedures so that we can get their feedback. And once we get that feedback, we can better align on protocol requirements. But we also want to make sure that they are aware and they're advocating for us since they are trusted partners of patients. It's always good for them to be trusted partners of the study and for them to push the study in terms of awareness to their members. And then from a patient support perspective, we mentioned that women and certain minority communities may be more affected by these diseases. So we do really want to make sure that from a diversity perspective, that we're providing this patient education and support, providing them with protocol-specific information, letting them know how this can help them and their quality of life. And then also making sure that we are putting in place compliance trainings and providing them, again, with videos that will walk through things such as the procedure and some of the training options. This overall will ensure buy-in, not only for the study, but also long-term buy-in from a retention standpoint, that they stay engaged and they stay motivated. And so overall, just to wrap up in terms of how we can support patients through a patient-centric lens, is again, reducing the burden for patients by providing travel support, arranging those transportation and lodging for patients, really so they won't have to come out of pocket for those expenses, making sure that we're facilitating stipends and reimbursements, and also aligning with assigning travel liaisons that really can assist patients with any bookings, itinerary changes, and travel-related concerns that they may have. We want to make sure that as we are supporting these patients with travel support, that we understand exactly how they like to travel, what concerns they may have if they're connected with certain airlines, for instance, or if they have certain ways that they need to travel, that we have that information up front and we support them. Providing those educational videos. We've provided educational videos across multiple studies, and it really does go a long way in terms of explaining the purpose of the study, the different procedures, and really setting those expectations up front. You can also distribute these videos through multiple channels to increase engagement, but also have those videos translated and so that they're available across the board for all patients. And then again, those milestone and comfort items where we're providing branded educational items to patients when they enroll. And then we're providing it to them at specific time points throughout enrollment. This has really helped to support us in our retention efforts. But again, it also helps to support us in thanking patients overall for being a member of the study. We would need to track and manage that distribution. And also just overall, those comfort items help to reduce anxiety and boredom during long visits. So with that, I will hand it back to Dr. Head.
Thanks, Maisha. So first of all, I'd like to thank Jackie, Jeff, and Maisha. And I'd like to thank everyone who's attended this session discussing the very important topic of rheumatology trials, the emerging therapies, and the innovations. Many people are impacted by rheumatic diseases, and there's a large unmet need for more effective treatments. As we look into the future rheumatology trials, we see there have been advancements in the understanding number of therapeutic targets, and there are several therapeutic approaches that are being investigated. As research continues to evolve, we anticipate strategies of more effective and targeted approaches, such as using biomarkers that may classify individuals into subpopulations that are expected to respond to a specific treatment, or applying a treatment to multiple diseases that may share a similar mechanism, including basket trials that can improve efficiency. Jackie and Jeff have done a great job to review some strategies to conduct rheumatology studies, particularly as it comes to identifying areas with less competition, more potential eligible patients, unique country-specific issues, and addressing additional challenges of cell therapies, such as regulatory requirements and collaboration between rheumatology and hematology departments. Maisha has reviewed some important approaches to maximize patient recruitment and retention, particularly education and maintaining involvement in the important challenge of addressing the needs of diverse populations, ensuring rheumatology clinical trials are representative of the populations affected by the diseases, and that's crucial for reducing disparities. So with that, I'll conclude the presentation, and again, thank you very much for attending. And now we'd like to answer a few questions that we received from the audience during the presentation. So the first question we received is directed to myself, and the question is, what rheumatology indications do you see as less competitive in the market and have a high unmet need? That's a great question. We still see a high unmet need in many rheumatology indications, but some particular examples are difficult to treat rheumatoid arthritis, those that have symptoms despite multiple treatments and including biologics. There's a need in non-radiographic axial spondyloarthropathies. We need better diagnostic and therapeutic approaches. And also, there's a huge unmet need in the more rare rheumatic diseases with limited treatment options, and those include systemic lupus erythematosus, systemic sclerosis, ANCA vasculitis, the idiopathic inflammatory myopathies, and particularly primary Sjogren's disease, which really has no approved treatment to date.
Okay, so the second question we received from the audience today is, given the current competitive landscape, in addition to the operational challenges discussed, are there regions in which MedPace would recommend conducting cell therapy studies? So, as discussed earlier, there are in fact a large number of ongoing cell therapy studies for several autoimmune indications in North America as well as Europe. And this makes these countries highly competitive for both institutional resources as well as the patients. However, and depending on a number of factors, including the specific indication, prevalence, the standard of care, new therapies which are approved, available, and reimbursed, in addition to the manufacturing location and startup timelines, other regions might be more appropriate and certainly should be critically evaluated. For example, countries in both Latin America and Mexico have less competition and a good prevalence of patients with autoimmune indications. And importantly, investigators in these countries have a strong interest in working on these trials with cell therapies. Additionally, there are large academic centers with the operational infrastructure to support these trials. At the same time, the startup timelines for some of these countries are longer, and the import and export may require additional time compared to North America and Europe. The Asia-Pacific region should also be considered for the same parameters. And depending on the specific country and indication, there may be unique opportunities with less competition compared to North America and Europe.
And unfortunately, that's all the time we have today for question and answers. But our team will follow up with any additional questions that we didn't have time to answer today. And again, it's been a pleasure, and I thank you. And now I'll pass it back to Ryan.
Well, thank you very much for that very insightful presentation and the answers to those questions, but we have reached the end of our time here today. Now, if we couldn't attend to your questions, know that the team at MedPace will follow up with you, or if you have further questions, you can direct them to the email address that's up on the screen. I want to thank everyone for participating in today's webinar. You will be receiving a follow-up email from XTalks with access to the recorded archive for this event. A survey window will be popping up on your screen as you exit, and your participation is appreciated as it helps us to improve our webinars. Additionally, I've shared a link to view the recording of today's event in the chat box, which you can also share with your colleagues so they may register for the recording here as well. For those watching via LinkedIn Live events, we encourage you to visit xtalks.com to register for this event and then gain access to features such as viewing the recording and more. Now, please join me once more in thanking our speakers for their wonderful time here today. We hope that you found the webinar informative. Have a great day, everyone, and thank you for coming.